Welcome to The Art of Growth. I'm Jim Zartman, and today we've got a doozy for you. Joel and I are interviewing Adele and Doug Calhoun, authors of Spiritual Rhythms for the Enneagram, and we feel so lucky to have them on the show because Adele and Doug are straight up Enneagram sages, and are sages in a lot of ways, as you will see. So we are super thankful to have them on. Before we get to that, though, a little bit about us. You can get to the hub of all of our work at www.theartofgrowth.org. You can get in contact with us there for individual coaching or a corporate coaching if you'd like us to come in and work with your team. We also have an Instagram page just called Art of Growth and a Facebook page. Since we do make some references to some visual components in this episode, those visual components will be posted on our Instagram and our Facebook page this week, so you can see some of the images that Adele and Doug reference from their book. But for right now, let's get to our conversation with Adele and Doug Calhoun.
Well, I am so excited to have both Doug and Adele Calhoun with us. These are folks who have been working in the Enneagram or with the Enneagram for many years. And you've recently written a book, and I'm excited about that book because I think it's one of the first of its kind to focus in on centers. But let's begin with getting to know you two a little bit more. Tell us a little bit about yourselves and what you do.
Well, currently we do a lot of consulting with various leaders in the church, as it turns out, where we also do spiritual direction. And then we do a lot of speaking around the Enneagram in various places with nonprofits, churches, organizations, or just individuals, and do consulting with them.
Yeah. We have two children that are grown, and they have been exposed to the Enneagram since they were in high school. And it's like, take that Enneagram away. But now they see the value of it, and our daughter is a trained facilitator and sometimes works with us. So that's been fun.
Nice. So one of the challenges that we've run into with the popularity of the Enneagram is how there's so much focus on type, and that's wonderful. But sometimes we get stuck there, right? And just, here's my type. Mm-hmm. And so this book seems to take it beyond that. Could you talk a little bit about that?
So we really believe that one number is not sufficient for describing any person, and that all of us are made up of head intelligence, heart intelligence, and gut intelligence. And in the diagnostic arrow theory, it's just 3, 6, 9 that land in head, heart, and gut in their triangle. And so the Harmony Enneagram basically gives everybody access to head, heart, and gut, because every human has access to these intelligences. And so we feel like starting with the intelligences and asking, what does my head think, my heart feel, my gut instincts, gives you a lot more information about who you are than just saying, I'm a 4. So I'm a 4, but in Harmony, I'm connected to 7 and 1. That's my triangle. So instead of just having the word creativity, 4, the creative person, or 4, the original person, I pick up qualities from 7. I pick up qualities from 1. So I would describe myself as creativity, joyfully, 7, renews, 1. And when I'm using all 3 of those intelligences so that my creativity isn't just about my artistic expression, my music, my art, when it is actually given joyfully, it will do something in the world. It will be renewing. And so it gives me a pathway. Creativity is a joyful thing that can renew.
So let's back up for a second for those who may not be as familiar with what even are these centers of intelligence, where are they situated on the Enneagram? Give us like the primer level of introduction to what these centers are.
I'll even back up a little bit further and answer one of the reasons, or what I heard when you asked the question of the problem with the popularity of the Enneagram right now is that it's almost at the level of a parlor game. So it'll come up and say, well, I'm a 1. What are you? And then that's the end of the discussion. And I feel like I know you, and you should know me because that answers everything. I heard Russ Hudson not too long ago say that the Enneagram's like a palace full of wonderful beauty and understanding for life. And unfortunately, most people find their door, their number, but then they never walk in. And I feel like just knowing your type is like standing at the door and never actually going in. And so part of our—
That's good.
That's really good.
Yeah, I love that image. And so part of the reason we wrote the book was we taught the Enneagram for years, and people will say, well, now that I know my number, what do I do? And we feel like, well, yeah, that just knowing your number, that's the starting gate. And so that's how we want to move forward. So the intelligences, people talk about them differently, but the 891 is the gut intelligence. We labeled that the GQ, as borrowing from the magazine. No, not from the magazine, but it's the gut intelligence. And then the 234 is the heart center, the emotional center, the EQ. And then 567 is the IQ, the head center. And so those are the 3 blocks. And typically, if you just know your number, you're in one of those. And so that's where we start with it.
And we would say, look at all the brain science and research that's come out right now. We all know we have millions of neurons in our brains, but we have huge neural network around our heart and a magnetic field around our heart that's 60 times greater than that in our head. And the whole gut enteric system is filled with neurons that actually can send messages to the brain faster than the brain can think them. And so part of what we want to say is we all have 3 ways of knowing. And you may have grown up in a family that dismissed the heart way of knowing because it was too emotional or brought too much touchy-feely energy into the room. And so you may be really good in your head or even in your gut, but you don't trust that heart stuff. And so part of the reason we think coming to understand that the 3 centers of your energy is that you can re-embrace parts of yourself that you've dismissed or that you really haven't worked with much at all.
Talk a little bit more about these centers as intelligences. Like what's the sort of superpower of the head types and the superpower of the heart types and superpower of the body types or gut types?
Well, so I live in the gut type. I'll do that one. So the gut are the people that—
Because you're a 1, correct?
I am a 1, yes. The gut people feel and experience life instinctively and immediately. They're like in the moment, and their body is registering all kinds of data all the time. And that data is usually overwhelming to them. And so their primary mechanism is trying to control. And they each have 3 different ways of controlling, the 8, 9, and 1. But their method is, I'm got too much on my dials and I want to damper it down a little bit or fix the situation so that I'm not so overwhelmed. And the general sort of struggle with this intelligence is they don't often succeed at that, so they get angry. And so they have 3 different ways of expressing their anger: blow up, bury, steam. And so their desire and goal is to figure out how do we make this a just place, really. Their justice and rightness is all a part of their attitude. So all of those things are stewing from the gut center all the time.
And is there an intelligence in the sense that you pick up on information, and when you do or when you're in motion, there's sort of an intelligence about that motion?
Totally. Yeah. The gut people can sense in a given situation with a given person, are they being truthful, not truthful? Are they safe, not safe? They tend to have an intuitive knowing of things, and they can certainly be wrong. But they often have they just have a knowing. We had this long-standing thing in our marriage, one of many, where she would say, well, do you like so-and-so? And I say, no, I don't. And I said, you just met them. And I said, no, don't like them. And then often it would pan out later. There was a good reason why I had no notion. It wasn't anything about their dress, color, anything. It's just like my radar was, and there was something there. And then other times I'm like, oh, okay, I misjudged that. I need to, go back and open up a bit. So they're constantly making judgments about their world. And sometimes, and even often, they can be quite right, and they help and protect and do lots of good things. Other times they judge too quickly.
Can you talk about that preoccupation with action as it relates to that center of intelligence?
Well, everything is pretty immediate for them. So what they see and sense, they respond to. And that's actually one of the things that they're challenged. So the head triad is like thinking forever and never doing anything, potentially. The gut triad has done something before they've thought about it often. It's just like right there. And again, that can be their strength, and that certainly can be their weakness.
But this is interesting because it's a skill because you've worked on it so much. If you're a gut person, you've worked and developed this ability to intuit, right? To understand the world. So even though you say sometimes you're wrong, you're often right? There's a sort of like, you would say more often, this sort of like you kind of have picked up on some things.
Well, if you're really working on the whole aspect of your life, the things we're going to talk about, the true self, false self, and all that jazz. But it is the case. I rely when I'm working with people or when we're speaking, I can often, Adele, she'll be talking about the heart center, can pick up the emotions of the room, but I can pick up other things. And so we've both learned to lean into those because we've cultivated them, and we try to trust the other person for what they're doing.
Maybe, Adele, you can talk about the emotional then.
Yeah.
And the intelligence around that.
So the heart knows things that nothing else knows, just like the gut knows things. And I grew up in a family that didn't trust heart, that it was much more important to trust your head than even, guts can be wrong. Feelings, well, they change so much. How can they be right? And so there was this sense that because feelings come and go, they're not to be trusted. But the heart people, research helps us out now and says, feelings are a very important part of decision-making. Feelings actually can be a truer measure of what's going on in a room than somebody standing on the outside who's watching and deliberating. The heart knows. And for 2, 3s, and 4s, that heart center is all about, are we connected? Are you connected to me? Is this connection good? What do I have to do to maintain connection? So these are doers, 2, 3, 4s, but the doing is all around how do we keep connections and relationships flowing. And I would say the heart center, when it's not in its sweet spot, it's looking at people to mirror back to them who they are. So rather than having a sense of this is who I am, they'll walk into a room, read the room, do what people need done so that somebody will say to them, attaboy, what a wonderful person you are. And so the downside of the feelings is that if my feelings give me information to be manipulative and do for you, I am not in a good place. And then when people don't respond the way I want them to, I'm in even worse place. I think these people are the glue that keeps many things together. They're wonderful at connecting. They're wonderful at caring. But they have a dark side. We have a dark side.
Yeah, but there's also the bright side. There's also the power that
That's
you have and the ability to, as you were saying, read a room, understand what is going to work well for the group in terms of presentation. And sometimes these are not things that body or head types pick up on.
That's right.
That heart types can read almost immediately.
And that's, in our relationship, that's been both a good and a hard thing because he may go with his gut and I'm like, can't you see what that's doing to the people in the room? But there's other times I need his can't you see that you're just needing people to say, atta girl, stand up for yourself.
You alluded to something that I talked to a therapist friend of mine about, where she was saying that the research around the heart, seeing that it sends more signals to the brain than the brain sends to the heart, that there's so much actual data in that. And I wonder if sometimes it's because, like, as a body type, what I notice in myself is an intelligence of what to do, but it is very quick. And it almost streams out as much data as possible in order to go into it. But the heart, it seems to be like, why it seems unreliable to some, it's almost like too much data.
Interesting.
When you're reading a room, it's like there's so much that's coming at you and you're perceiving so much at the same time that I wonder if for some people it feels either unreliable or it's like, well, what do you do with that much information when it's like how people are thinking, how they're feeling, the temperature of the room. There's just so much data that it seems like you guys sometimes perceive, and that could be an overwhelming feeling.
I think that's a really interesting, I've not thought about it that way, because I feel like, just speaking as a 4, and I don't know that this is a 4-ish thing, and I think it could be a heart center thing, but in general, gut people are not great multitaskers. It's like one thing, and then the next thing, and then the next thing, that full intensity on one thing. And I feel like the connection people are always juggling a lot of balls, and that we're very comfortable in general with the multitasking and all the people in the room. And as you learn what sort of certain people, what energy they're projecting, and you learn how to respond to it, you're not thinking about it. You know in your heart that this person needs compassion and that person needs something else and that person. So something about it grows so that it just doesn't feel overwhelming to me.
The one thing I was thinking actually was, I think each center has their sense of being overwhelmed. So like for the head people, they have more data to deal with that they keep needing to spin around. They're inactive with their data. The heart people have so much that they can get overwhelmed with all of their desire to connect. In other words, so the 2, 3, 4 don't have limits. That's one of their big challenges. So that's their overwhelmed part. And the 8, 9, 1, there's so much things they're trying to control that they're like in intense crisis mode a lot. And so I think there is a sense in which each intelligence can feel overwhelmed by what they're doing, though they may not think that, but they're like, I've got to do something with this. So the 2, 3, 4, I mean, when she's in a crowded room, like she's got to be connecting with somebody. It's like, it's the compulsion of the heart. The gut is control and the head is, let me think about this. So it's those automatic things that can get us stuck. And then the gift that we have gets hijacked.
Well, you are setting us up for the good stuff that I'm looking forward to talking about in a few minutes about how do you stop that overwhelm? How do you grow? How do you get into the other centers to sort of balance yourself out? But you haven't talked about the head, and I'm sitting over here as a 7, and I'm dying to know. Talk to me about the head center and the intelligence there and the superpower there, and also some of the challenges.
Here are the wonderful people who have brought technology and human advancement and research and books and knowing to our world. And where would we be without head people? I mean, head people are often at the very tip of the spear in terms of human advancement. Yet they often are distrustful of feelings and even the hot emotions that come from the gut. And their place of safety, they're often concerned about safety and security. Do we have enough information? Is this good for everyone? 6, is this safe? Is this about the common good? Are we really shoring up society to make sure that it goes the distance? And the 7 is that disguised headspace number, because you look at it and you think, they're not in their head, they're just having a good time. but it's all the plans and strategies that they have going on for what's happening next. That will be fun and delightful. And they're very visionary about what could be. This could be. They just don't want to be the one who maintains what could be. They want you to maintain what could be so they can keep dreaming big dreams. So I love this head center. It's a place I feel very safe. Information can be a big piece of safety. And what happens often in this triad is there's a belief that you can compensate for your own personality quirks and lack of sociability just by knowing a lot. That doesn't always work, but it's this sense of if I know a lot, I'm pretty safe. And this is often the center that is quickest to say, well, I don't know. Let me think about that. But if they know something about it, watch out. You may hear pontification going on and on ad nauseum. They don't know when to stop. So,
True.
Yeah.
There's a neuroscientist that I've been communicating back and forth with who's doing some really cutting edge. She's very young, doing some cutting edge work on the Enneagram.
Cool.
And one of the things that she's talking about is this concept of the sort of spatial ability to make these connections from the head type that are really predisposed for innovation.
Yeah.
And then you have the body types that are much more about the mechanical, the how do you make these things connect and work, and how do you create the engine. They can do it so fast that they get right into motion right away, whereas head types tend not to do that. And the heart types are interesting. It was like they're the ones that can really memorize what actually is and then also know how to present that to the group. So it's really, really interesting stuff that I'm looking forward to talking more.
About,
Yeah.
So this has been very helpful. You started to talk a little bit about some of the challenges that each of the centers have. And then you had mentioned true self, false self. That's kind of a phrase that's been used a bit. There's some confusion around it, I think. My first time ever hearing it, I thought, is this speaking to something bad within me, the false self? The true self is the good side of me? Is it like the bad wolf, good wolf? So maybe say more of what is the true self, false self? And then how do we lean into it, the true self versus the false self?
So I want to start by saying often the false self is the automatic default self. What your first default response is before you've thought about it, before you've regulated it. So, for instance, in the gut triad, power is the default response. Boom. A true self response would not be to say, I have no power. It would be to say, how much power do I need in this moment? So that's how I understand the difference between the true self and the false self. In part.
I could feel that on my skin. That was so good. I was like, oh, preach. That's so good.
So I'll do the more idealistic version as a one. So the way I think we talk about it, the terms as we know it, at least, sort of came from Thomas Merton and his writings when he was trying to help people in their spiritual journey figure out what does it mean to grow in your faith. And the general Enneagram world uses similar language of basically, am I my essence? Am I living out of my true essence? So that'd be the true self, who you're really created to be. Or am I living a false or adaptive self that is sort of using my coping mechanisms to deal with reality? And in the Christian tradition, they would talk about that as the nature, the sinful nature. In the psychological, would be the ego and superego. And that's where you're living on your own, and you're essentially some way or another trying to force reality into your version of it. Whereas the true self would be where we're meant to be in the Christian tradition, in the true self in Christ. In the psychological, it's the real you. It's not an ego presentation or persona. It's like, who I am in my essence. I think one of the geniuses of the Enneagram is it helps us reveal what's this false self-ego stuff that's got me captured that I'm so addicted to, but it's not really me. And what would my real self, true self, actually look like, and how do I get there? And I feel like it isn't the end-all of everything, but it's like this huge both mirror and roadmap at the same time.
I like that, mirror and roadmap. When we think about the personality formation from an early age, there's a type that maybe you are from birth, and that's a lot of what some of the theories out there are really kind of leaning more into, is that you're born your type, but then you develop this personality around the type that then leans you towards the false self, as you're describing. Maybe say something about that, particularly as you think about maybe putting it in some more concrete terms, like as a 1, if your sensitivity is already towards right and wrong. As a 4, if your sensitivity is already to feeling the need for what you perceive as something missing in this world and in yourself, what happens is maybe a message comes along that then triggers that or starts to form the personality. I mean, these are theories, but just sort of in general, kind of putting it into more tangible form for us might be helpful.
So as a 4, connection matters. And when I perceive that you don't connect with me. So this is the perfect place where I can say, am I going to have a true self response? Or is this just going to be an autopilot? And the autopilot is, I am fatally flawed. There is something deeply wrong with me, and that person sees it. And I need to do something to make them like me. And all of that energy is just so I'm not even really seeing you anymore. It's all the feelings inside of me that begin to get larger and larger and larger. And for me, this has been such a journey to being able to receive the kind of connection people give me as enough. It's not about a fatal flaw. And I mean, I can give a perfect example that happened this weekend. I'm super aware of the choices that are before me to be in my true self, living in inner freedom. I think that true self is free inside, not hooked by how are you responding, or am I hooked there? So I had a friend fly in from Phoenix, and she wrote a couple months ago, said she was coming, and that she wanted to spend a day with me, which is great. And she was going to spend 4 days with my other friend. So immediately, I have before me, she must love the person she's staying with the most. And I don't matter. And so I can start into this default litany about myself. Now, there are good reasons for this person to stay with my friend because my friend's a widow. They're good friends as well. So there's lots. So I go to my head and I think, so there are good reasons for what she's doing. And then I go back to my heart and say, she wants to spend a whole day with me. That is a gift. Will I receive what she's given as a gift, or will I turn that gift into no gift at all because it is not the gift she gave somebody else? And so there's this constant dialogue. When I am in inner freedom, I can just say, thank you for what you've given me. We are connected enough. And when I'm not in the good place, I go right down the fatal flaw hole. Into just reactivity. That's anything you say is hurtful, too sensitive, all that kind of stuff. Taking it too personally, very narcissistic.
You were asking about sort of if we were sort of born with our type and what sort of happens with that in our personality development. I feel like I'm with you in the sense that certainly birth has something to do with it. We've sort of come to the flexible place of saying, well, it's nature, nurture, and choice. Somewhere in there, we end up in our
I like
number.
That, yeah.
One third.
Yeah, we don't even,
we don't know.
We don't know. But I do find that as we talk to people, even if they don't have a sense very early on of what they are, there is a way in which I knew from an early age of either the way my parents were expecting things of me or just how life was going, that I wanted to be a good boy. I wanted to do the right thing and got rewarded for that. And also the expectation was such that I actually felt like I never was because I never did it perfectly. So all of the language around a 1 I can trace back, really early. One of the challenges in my family actually was I have a very strong 2 wing, and emotions were just not a part of our family at all. So I live with a tension of those 2 things in my journey as well.
One of the things that Jim and I have noticed come across our different feeds and conversations we've had with people is that there's sort of an excusing of the type, that I'm who I am because of my type. I don't know if you guys run into that, particularly now, again, as the Enneagram is getting more popular.
I've never heard that before. That's such an unusual thing.
It seems like when it was hidden, the Enneagram was hidden, very few people could use it as an excuse. It was sort of like if you went to the Enneagram, you did it because you wanted to grow and transform. But now it's sort of turned into a version of Myers-Briggs or DISC or, the other personality systems.
We certainly are sad. We're delighted that more people know about the Enneagram. We're really sad that most people really don't know about the Enneagram. They just know their number. And like we said earlier, that's only the beginning of the story. And usually, unfortunately, because things like DISC or Myers-Briggs, they're just labels and descriptors. None of those talk about transformation. They're just like, this is what you are. And they can unfortunately presume that that's what the Enneagram does. And the Enneagram has at its very core, at its total understanding is this is a tool for change. So you're identifying the location where you live and giving you a direction for what health looks like. So if you only know the location and you don't move, then you haven't understood the Enneagram. And so when we do talk to people in all of our spiritual direction and teaching, we basically say, this isn't a tool to peg other people, or to excuse yourself. That's really the last thing this is for. If you really get the Enneagram, you're like, oh man, that's what I'm like. Help, please help me. As opposed to, oh, well, I'm a this. If it's a really proud thing, then they haven't really heard what the Enneagram has to say about them, because the Enneagram strips you bare and lays your motives out there for everybody to see, and they're not pretty. They're just not pretty. Any number, they got nobody.
I think the first time I ever read on my type, I was mortified. And I even wanted to hide it for a while because I was afraid that if someone read that description, they would see the core vice, and then I'd be completely exposed.
Yeah.
I mean, I'm assuming this is a pretty common. This is what most of my clients have as a reaction is, oh my goodness, this is me, and there's sort of like a little bit of that feeling of exposure.
Yeah.
No, I pretended to be another number for 4 years because I thought, who wants to be the most narcissistic number on the Enneagram? I mean, really, that couldn't be worse.
Yeah. And when that happens, that's the beginning of possible change. If you actually see, oh, this is I feel known down to my core. How did you know that? And also almost and what can I do about it? How do I get out of this? And frankly, a lot of people do feel stuck in that false self, ego, adaptive place. And when they get exposed, they just feel like, okay, now you know the worst about me, and now what am I going to do? But I actually think the Enneagram does give us tools to say, okay, here's what we can begin doing with it.
Well, there's a type of shame that can come at people through the Enneagram and through other personality systems that is really unhelpful.
Yes.
True.
But then there's this, what you're describing is something very different. It's this awareness of that deep, that's always been there. And there's a relief around that. Now I know what the actual issue is. If I don't know what the problem is, I forever
can't fix it. And I think it's about awareness. You can't change what you don't know. And Jerome Wagner talks about how the Enneagram reveals your hot spots, your blind spots, and your sweet spots. And I like those three because we are blind. And I feel like the Enneagram opens your eyes, what it's like for people to be on the other side of me. What is it like to be on the other side of a 4? Oh my goodness,
Yeah, I think before that, I never was really aware of how other people were experiencing me. And so I was just confused when anything didn't go as I expected based on my intentions.
Right.
Yeah, I think that what the Enneagram says is each of us live in our own little world that we assume everybody's operating on all the same criteria. And we have certain glasses with a certain prescription, and we're thinking everybody sees the world the exact same way. And so that's where we can be seeing but be blind because we miss all the other perspectives. We have been teaching several times just in workshops, and we really did try to say the point here isn't to shame people. Particularly the 2, 3, 4s, that's one of they feel that perhaps the most. We would see the Enneagram as an invitation into health. But you don't get healthy until you know where you're sick. And so it's a awareness of what is it that enslaves me in a way that I didn't even know I was enslaved, and what would freedom look like for me. But you got to have both. And so the shame isn't the point. It's let's be real about who we actually are and what that means in all my relationships and what the journey might look like.
And I might add to that there's a way in which the Enneagram shows us our own special addiction to ourselves. That each number has a particular addiction to the self. And to say, do I want to live out of that addiction or do I want inner freedom?
That's well said. It's funny. I laugh because I've been using that kind of analogy that each one of us, it's like our personality, our way of getting our needs met has turned into a drug.
Yep.
It is very much like a drug addict because you can't stop.
You can't stop. That's right.
And until you know that you have a problem, you know what the problem is, you're sort of in this automatic pattern of just being addicted.
Well, and like most addictions, it takes more to get less results. So you're always
well said. That's
pushing
very true.
it,
yeah.
And it gets less. So it is an addiction, and it never satisfies. So that's why it's enslavement. You're hooked. And so to get out of that is a major delight.
All right, so let's talk about how we integrate these different intelligences, head, heart, body, and maybe say a little bit about how they tend to order themselves by certain types. And maybe we don't have time to go through all 9 types, but as a body type, that there's sort of like the preference of operating from that instinctual self and the heart type from that. And then what happens after that, because we have all 3, right? So it's not like you're a body type, you don't have the heart or the head. But maybe in what order do those tend to flow, and how how one tends to dominate the others, and then how to integrate them.
What came to mind when you first asked the question was it might be helpful just to explain what our harmony triad theory is compared to the diagnostic first. Would that be helpful?
Really good, yes.
So if you've looked at an Enneagram book or chart, that process or diagnostic arrow theory that Gurdjieff and Naranjo developed in the 50s is the one you're used to. And there's arrows, and it's the law of 3, the law of 1, and the law of 7, all
9.
combined, into one sort of complicated figure. And if you have that in your mind's eye, then you realize that the 2 and the 4 have no arrow connection to the head triad, the head intelligence. And the 7 and the 5 have no connection to the heart intelligence. The gut triad is we're already tooled in good. So not to worry about the gut triad. But in the Harmony Triad, which Harmony Triad's link is from a writer in the 1200s, Ramon Lull, developed a very similar diagram. And then David Daniels wrote about this in the recent years. And then our co-author really helped develop the theory that we write about with the Harmony Triads and Ignatian spirituality. So that you already have the 9-3-6, which is an equilateral triangle. And then basically we look at the 8, 2, and 5, and this 1, 4, and 7. And so then each number has a representative in each intelligence. And so that's the Harmony Triads that we work with, and then we try to help figure out how do those integrate.
I want to make a distinction between the harmony triangles and tri-type theory, because there's a tri-type theory that says, go find your highest number in your head, heart, and gut, and you will have a sense of how to move. And we want to say, for instance, our co-author is a 3. Her highest gut number is 8, and her highest head number is 7. So think about the energies of those 3 numbers. If they're all extroverted, they're all outward, they're all go, move, drive, impact.
No limits.
No limits, keep going. And so that's not a path for transformation, just to keep barging through life. But if you look at the harmony triangles, they're just this elegant way of saying, what does that 3 actually need? Needs the energy of the 6 that says it's not all task, common good, caring about the people you're with, being loyal to them. And it's about chilling out and resting at 9 and taking a break and slowing down. And so a path for transformation for the on steroids 3 is to say, I can move to 6 and to 9, and it will actually give me an arc for health if I tap in to my head and my gut intelligence.
And I'll ultimately be more productive than I ever could be on my own. So the combination actually enhances the virtue of each number rather than detracts.
So instead of just saying, well, 3 is the impactful person or 3 is the effective person, we would say, for my number, rather than saying I'm the effective person, I'd say effective, loyalty harmonizes. That's where I'm going. As I do my tasks, I'm trying to bring people along. I'm trying to bring harmony out of this rather than wreckage. It's not just about landing on top with a success. It's all these things. So that's the beauty of the theory.
Since this is audio for everyone who's listening, on the day that this podcast is released, I will also have images from their book of the Harmony Triad. You can see that on our Instagram, which is just called Art of Growth. But you can you'll see our podcast logo there. Our podcast logo will also be on the Facebook page, which unfortunately Facebook, we still can't change the name, and it's still under Enneagram Panels as the Facebook page. So if you look on either of those today, the day it's released, or you can look back in the feed, you'll actually see these images because they are up there, so that, you know, it's very hard to imagine them sometimes when you're just hearing the audio. So I want you to be able to go and see those in person. So for our listeners, like, if they're used to the regular Enneagram image, they're used to seeing the 9 with the connection to the 3 and the 6. They're used to seeing the 2 with the connection to the 4 and the 8. But the ones that are missing, can you talk about like the lines in the harmony for the ones that they were not as used to seeing?
Sure.
Well, I think, for instance, I have used Jerry Wagner's WEPS test with, well over 1,000, probably 1,500 people, and looked at their scores. And though the 5 has no connection to the 2 on that general Enneagram, when I looked at them, they would often have 2 in it. And if I talked with them, I would they're the most reserved and non-emotional one on the page. But if I actually talked to them, I always found that they could move to 8 and had power places in their life, and that they had really heart-tender places. And so when I first heard about the Harmony Triads, I was thinking, this makes so much more sense, because when I would talk with a 5 about their heart and their gut, they suddenly felt like, it just like, how something goes cha-ching and you feel like, that fit. So that would be the kind of thing. And the same would be true for, like, as Adele had said, to realize that she had a head in the 4, that she wasn't just connected to the gut and the heart, that she had that. It really is when she is able to go to the light possibility, a little bit more open, joyful, not so morose, deep, then she is able to have fidelity and faithfulness and consistency of a 1. And so she brings amazing creativity at that point. So I think the really delightful discovery as we're working with these Harmony Triads is your number just glows with its beauty when it's attached to all 3 intelligences. When it's on its own, it's there. You hook it up to the other intelligences, and it's like it really is glory. It's the glory that God has put in you to show to the world, and it just blossoms.
But it is the glory of the harmony. It is not just your 3 intelligences. Like we talked about with 3.
So it's the integration.
It's the integration on your equilateral triangle. And that it works that way, to me, is just, that's the magic of the Enneagram.
It's like a trinity.
It
is. It's a trinity.
So it is the law of 3. It's a basic strength building thing of the universe. And so, and it's community. It's meant to be this dynamic interplay. And as we said, Adele really helpfully said, the sad thing is we almost always, with almost every person we've talked to, we do 2 out of the 3, but we have 1 that we just dismiss, don't know, don't trust. And so we are like a 3-legged stool without a leg, and we wonder why we keep falling over.
In our relationship, growing up in a family that didn't trust the gut, I marry a gut person who has gut instincts.
Glory to God. I'm glad to.
And they're strong, and they're powerful, and they're immediate, and they're intense. And so for me, who's in the heart, it's like they're too strong. They're too intense. They're too. But when he goes to 7, lightens up, opens up, lets some of that judgment go. When he comes to 4, he brings his creativity. And when we meet at 7, actually, when I, as a 4, go to 7 and he goes to 7 as 1, it's really fun at our house.
I would imagine that's a lot of fun. And I also noticed in working with couples and then looking at your diagram, how often you see that harmony in couples. Like the 2 and the 5 don't have a line together, but I've met several 2-5 couples, met a lot of 4-7 couples, also 1-4 couples, which are not in a line on the original Enneagram, but there is a harmonizing of that happens, and there seems to be a drawing with couples to that harmony
Just an
line.
Intuitive.
Yeah, that's what I pick up on. It's more intuitive. It's like I see in you what's something in me that's missing, or that's not, that's been repressed in some way.
Right. Well, you often say that I love them because they're so different than me. Yeah. And it drives you nuts, but you also realize you see something I just don't pick up in the world. And so.
Yeah, that's good. When you had said that you had done lots of tests and you've talked with so many people and this is what emerges, I think it's a very important point to make about the Enneagram is that in really pushing and continuing to push in this direction rather than the way that oftentimes people take theories and they create theories. And it's interesting, right? These are all interesting theories of, well, there's a group that are more assertive, and then so we'll call them the assertive triad, and then we call this other group that type of triad. But it's when you're working with people one-on-one that you start to see without you suggesting to them anything, that these qualities are already present within them and they emerge.
Yeah.
And it's consistent and they self-report. This is what is happening in me. When I first understood the Enneagram of harmonics, the first time I looked at it, I said, that makes all the sense in the world for me. That as a 7, when I feel emotion, it reminds me much more of the 4 than it does, say, the 2 or the 3. That's a really good and very important thing, is that as we're listening to people, this is what they're describing themselves as.
We would just say yay and amen. That when we saw it and started studying it, we just felt like, yeah, this is the way we actually see this flowing. And it made for very easy introduction into what are next steps. So that if you're in this particular intelligence and you don't trust that other intelligence, what would it begin? Let's talk about where that came from. Where in your childhood maybe was that dismissed or whatever? And then what would it look like to begin to open? And be even just the simple process that we use in one of our acronyms, which we'll get to here eventually, just to ask, well, what am I thinking about this? Because the heart triad may not ever stop to think. They're just feeling it. And the gut triad, God knows they're strangers to the head. They've already acted before they begin to think often. So to ask that question alone in a person's life can be startling to them, like, oh, well, actually, I think this. And then they realize I have this whole other perspective I could bring to this moment, to this relationship. Same with the other centers.
So there's a lot of hijacking that we tend to do with our other centers. So, as a head center person, I tend to either reject the emotions, repress the emotions, use my body to get my head desires, the gluttony of my head, to move and do the things I want it to do, and sometimes even manipulating the emotions as a way, or reframing the emotions. But it's always led by the king who sits on the throne, which is my head center. Talk about how we integrate. Let's explore that. How do you integrate the 3 centers?
Integration for me, part of it is integration can only happen when you know that you need to access another intelligence than your natural default intelligence. And so there's often in interactions like a sliver, this tiny sliver of time where you feel like, I have a choice. I could go this way or I could go that way. But, it can be a sliver. And if you're not aware that you get that sliver, you just go with what's default, automatic. So we would say you access the centers by stopping. And the acronym is STOP, and we would say S is see. See that sliver. See that there's a way right now you are just going to ride your energy come hell or high water. Stop. See it. And what has triggered you? What did Jim say that triggered me? T. What happened in this room that triggered me? ST. Okay, that's my trigger. O is open. And that's where we would say, open to your thoughts. What does my mind think? Open your heart. What does my heart feel? Open your gut. What is my gut instinct of what's going on here? Open. And when you can open, you can be present, P, to what is going on, rather than trying to take reality and force it to be what you want it to be. You can say, this is reality. How do I want to respond? So we would say STOP is just an acronym that helps us in the moment begin to say, I need to open to my other intelligences. And sometimes you can do it all very quickly. And sometimes you just know that you need to stop and you back up before you make a response. And then on the way home from work in the car, you'll think, okay, that was the trigger. What was I thinking? How was I feeling? what was my gut instinct? And you can work through it so that you develop patterns that help you recognize much more quickly and respond from your true self with inner freedom. I can let reality be what it is. I don't have to make it what I want it to be.
So the other thing I would add, I think it's fair to say that there's a totally different quality of life when we're able to be fully present to the moment. So that we have times where we experience that. And when we're there, we actually see the other person. We ourselves are pretty true to who we are. And it's a whole different experience. Sadly, most of the time, we're so in our false self that we're not actually fully present. And you aren't fully actually present. So when we meet, we're not actually meeting. We're sort of bumping spheres or something. And in this journey of integration, the idea is to begin to realize at that moment when I sense I'm having some sort of false self ego response. So in the body, your body might tense up, your heart, the pulse get sweaty, in your head, your mind starts spinning. Whatever your clue is, then that's when we practice stop. And one of the first things we would say, in addition just to how Adele describes it, is if you can, take a big, deep breath. What science tells us as well is if you take a big, deep breath, all spiritual practices in the East and just about everyone starts with breathing. Mm-hmm. Well, the reason is if you take a big, deep breath, that's a physiological signal to your body to reset. Mm. And so instead of having the instinctive automatic response, you've just taken this pause, like she said, and that enables you to begin then to open yourself to these other intelligences. Like we suggested before, they're there and they're accessible, except when you're in your automatic nature, and then you just don't even know they're there. Mm. And so when you're able to make that pause, those are there available to your head, heart, and gut, and the ability then to be fully present to the moment is an entirely different experience than when I'm zoomed in my false self place.
Mm. Yeah, Viktor Frankl, he has that quote about between stimulus and response, there is a pause, and in that pause is your freedom.
That's
without
exactly
that,
it.
Yeah.
Without that, we don't have the freedom.
Exactly.
And I know as an 8, whenever anything happens, my first immediate response is, what do I do about it? Mm-hmm. And then
attack.
Yeah. And then maybe the secondary is like, how do I think about this? Yeah. But it's the distant third. But in the distant third often is my freedom, which is also how do I feel about it? Mm-hmm. Like exactly what you're saying. In that pause, in that stopping, as your acronym points out, in that stopping is our freedom. Is our freedom to not live according to default, not live according to the false self, but actually be in the true self.
Yeah. Mm. I think if there's anything anybody would remember out of all of this is that pause, that moment of breathing, as you were saying, taking a breath is one of the most important steps in all of this. Because oftentimes we are triggered and we start feeling the energy in our body shift and we're getting anxious or angry or feeling sadness or shame. And then if we can just take a moment to breathe, it can then give us a chance to do the seeing, right, of stop, seeing, noticing the trigger, and then opening ourselves up to other possibilities, other centers.
We love the word open. We use it a lot because constricting is the opposite of open, right? And so often the trigger constricts something. And we may notice, like Doug said, it in our body or in our reaction. I've withdrawn, I've moved forward, I've attacked. So even that sense of I'm breathing gives me a chance to open something. Because the minute you breathe, you open the center of yourself. And it takes away some of that I'm constricted around the response. So even opening my arms as I breathe. I'm going to open myself.
So some physical postures you can actually engage in that can that can help.
Mm-hmm.
Particularly if you're for all types, but certainly if that's even foreign to you, like head types, oftentimes the body's the foreign part. Like I don't really deal with it much, but sort of like opening up, like spreading your arms out.
Yep.
And
in our workshop, we have people stand and take a big deep breath and then put their arms out as far as they can and then come back. And then we say, so how does that feel at the moment? And, like everybody's like, it changes your perception of reality. So we are body people. It's all connected. So it's one of the lovely things. You may feel like you can't do this, like, I can't stop my reaction. Well, yes, you can. If you take a big deep breath, you're talking 3 seconds. That gives you opportunity to go through the process that Adele described. And in that, what you begin to learn is, I have capacity to be my true self. That is what I most want to be. In our version, we say God's going to help you do that, but it's also just the natural longing of who everybody is to move toward that essence of freedom, that what it's like to just actually be me without excuse, without demand, and to let you be you without excuse or demand. And when you're there, you have communion, you have connection, you have agency, you have all the things you most want when you get to that place.
The centers seem to have their own language, it seems to me. So for head types, and speaking for myself as a head type, when I lean into the heart of the emotional center, at first it was difficult because the language or whatever I would feel would automatically get immediately interpreted, reframed, tried to understand it through the head center. And I've had to discipline myself to relax the mind and to actually say to my mind, I have to speak to it, say, this is not your turn. And then deliberately listen and continue to understand the voice of the emotions. And then also do the same thing with the body. It's so foreign when you first start out that it almost feels ridiculous and like, seriously, why am I doing this?
That's right.
But I have found it to be profound and open my eyes to things and give me new intelligences on how to approach issues in life.
Well said.
And practice is what makes any of us change. I mean, you're just describing it takes practice. It does take practice to play the piano and become a musician. It takes practice for me to have inner freedom and live from my true self.
And this is where, the current brain science is just actually verifying what the biblical pattern of transformation looks like, which is if you put off this old pattern, if you choose not to do this pattern, you open yourself, and then you choose a new pattern you put on. Well, the brain science says every time you do that, you're creating a new neural pathway toward a new normal. And the old pathway starts getting weaker. And so, just like you say, it can seem goofy at first, odd, not me, quote unquote. But when we practice it and lean into it, we realize, oh, this is the way of freedom. And this becomes more and more easy for me to choose. And this seems, I understand the dead end of this road, the old road, the false self. So practice is it's not going to happen instantaneously. Just knowing this stuff isn't going to change you. You're going to have to participate.
For those who are interested in knowing a little bit more about your work, this book, could you say a little bit, because obviously we're skimming the surface of your book. You dive more deeply, I'm assuming, into all of this. So maybe say a little bit about your book as we wrap up.
So our book is a handbook. It is really not a trade book for you to read from cover to cover. It is a way to start doing the work. And it leads you through questions and reflection questions and stories of scores of people who are just telling what it's like to be their number. So we have stories, we have exercises, and then we have practices. So even the stop practice, we have a stop practice that is specifically geared for each number because we all respond in different ways. And then the end of every chapter is a small group exercise on empathy for that number. So we don't just want you to have a sense of, well, this is who I am and how I can grow, but actually, how do I appreciate other numbers, and particularly numbers that I may find it hard to appreciate. So we're working towards harmony all the way through the book. How do I find internal freedom and harmony? How do I become a person who can harmonize with the other 8 numbers on the Enneagram? What is it like to live from harmony?
So it's called The Spiritual Rhythms for the Enneagram, a handbook for harmony and transformation.
Is there a website or anything, you guys?
Yes, so the book website is called Enneagram Harmony Triads Transform.org.
So there will be a link in the show notes. So
it's a long one.
So yeah, we'll post that.
Right. And so our co-authors, Claire and Scott Lowridge, and ourselves are on that. And then we both have individual websites that you can link off that one to find out. Claire does a whole 4-day workshop on the Harmony Triads. That'd be a great place for people that wanted to dig in more fully. And then we have a Facebook page, Spiritual Rhythms for the Enneagram. And we have Facebook Live videos and various blog posts that are on that page as well. So those would be the places to initially start, I think.
And we also do a certification course for spiritual directors who are interested in using the Enneagram in their practices.
Really good. Well, thank you both, Doug and Adele. Really, what a treasure this has been, and rich conversation, too.
Oh, I've learned so much. Just learned so much from you guys today.
Well, thank you very much for having us. Yeah. It's been delightful, and we're grateful for the gift you are to the Enneagram world, trying to get people on the page. So thanks.
So thanks again so much for joining us. Since Doug and Adele's website they mentioned is a little complicated, I will put in links to their book and to their webpage on the show notes, as well as on Facebook and Instagram. If you haven't left us a review yet on iTunes, please do so. It helps people find the show, and it helps us out a lot as far as visibility for this show and continuing to be able to expand it. If you'd like to get in contact with Joel or I, you can do so at our website, theartofgrowth.org. This show is produced by me, Jim Zartman, at Talkie Record Studio in Lynn, Massachusetts, and all music by me as well. And thank you for continuing to do your inner work to make this world a better place. Have a great week.